and we should do it because exercise is medicine. Yes, but also no. Yes, that's all true. That's all important. But exercise is always, it's also a way of someone having fun, to spend some time in their leisure activities, something that it can be performed with family, fathers or mothers playing with their children in the backyard or in the park and so on.
Affect during exercise tends to predict someone's adherence to exercise in the future. Less so for affect that someone might report when exercise is done, but particularly during exercise, that this is a really important outcome that people should be considering.
Humans are not only thinking machines. We do not do things merely because someone tell us that it is important, it is relevant. We are not as rational the majority of the moments as we think.
Yeah.
The best time of doing burpees is when they are over. I don't like doing burpees. For me, when they are over, it is perfect. I feel really good.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, so I'm not the only one.
Before we dive into today's episode of the Mental Wellbeing College, an important disclaimer. We do dive into the weeds of mental health, which means that at times we discuss sensitive topics like suicide, self-harm, and substance abuse. If hearing such discussion does bring up distress for you, please do seek the psychological and professional treatment that you need. The content covered in this episode is not intended as a substitute for professional mental health treatment. Hello everybody and welcome back to the show. Today we are joined by Professor Diogo Teixeira to discuss all things affect in exercise. Diogo is a professor and researcher at the Universidade Lusofona in the Faculty of Physical Education and Sport. Diogo is also an exercise professional, which informs lots of his really cool applied translational research with gyms and health clubs throughout Portugal. In today's episode, we discuss the importance of affect, emotions, and mood in helping you stay consistent in exercise, how to individualize exercise intensity so you can maximize your own adherence and consistency to your exercise and training, why the exercise is medicine approach is incomplete and needs reframing, and much, much more. Today's episode was inspired by a recent discussion with the wonderful Professor Steve Petrozello, where we opened the conversation into the importance of affect and mood in promoting exercise adherence. And if you'd like to check out that episode, we'll link it below in the show notes. This deep dive with Diogo continues on that trend and is a really important discussion, I think, just given the global public health phenomenon of physical inactivity and the fact that current public health strategies are really not changing physical activity rates globally in a meaningful way at the moment. If this episode does provide value, we would be so grateful if you were to hit subscribe, follow, or to share this podcast with someone you love. We are on a mission here at the show to provide an accessible, evidence-based resource to people the world over so they can take steps to improve their mental well-being, particularly through lifestyle interventions like physical activity and exercise. Now to today's episode with Professor Diogo Teixeira on affect in exercise. So, Professor Diogo Teixeira, welcome to the Mental Wellbeing College.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I chatted with Steve Petrozello and the whole affect in exercise came up, and that really led me down the rabbit hole of your work. So very keen to explore how affect plays a role in exercise and exercise adherence. But before we get into kind of the technical, the nitty gritty, Diogo, let's talk a little bit about your journey into research and exercise psychology. I'm always curious to know the story behind the research. How did you get into researching into the fields that you do research into now?
Okay, so first of all, I am an exercise professional. So I started my journey as a physical education teacher. And sometime in the middle of my journey, I decided that I would like to study a little bit more about exercise. I started to work in health clubs. I started to work as a personal trainer. And I really got in love with this idea of using exercise to improve performance or to improve health, or to use it as something that people enjoy doing, as some kind of ludic activity. So at some point, I understood that perhaps physical education is not an area that I would see myself working throughout the rest of my life. And I started to do other degrees. I have a master's degree in exercise and well-being. Then I decided to do my PhD in physical activity and health. And throughout the years, I started to look at the problems of exercise adherence from a motivational perspective. Although this is not the only reason why people do or do not engage in regular exercise or physical activity, if you want to take a broader term, but I started to see that motivation could help some people to understand their relation with exercise and how to promote it. So this journey started probably 15 years ago. My attempt to study and understand human psychology or exercise psychology and motivation. And my research in recent years has been considerably focused on those aspects. For example, I studied theory of planned behavior and self-determination theory in the past during my master and my PhD degrees. Currently, I'm a little bit more focused on the hedonic aspects of motivation. I am trying to look on the perspective of integrating hedonic assumptions with other known theoretical frameworks that help us understand human motivation. And I am currently excited with the idea, and what I'm going to study in the future is unknown at this time.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a very, very cool journey. I didn't know you were a personal trainer as well. I'm actually a personal trainer myself, so it's cool to meet another fellow personal trainer who's gone into the research world as well. And I can certainly see how that's informed a lot of your research, I imagine, because you do a lot of research, actively with health clubs and with people who are exercising in the real world, so to speak.
Yeah, so one thing that I particularly like in the research that I do, I'm not saying that it's good, but it's one aspect that I really enjoy it, is the fact that I am not a psychologist. And so I look at exercise and the difficulty of maintaining a regular exercise practice as someone that is not prepared to look at individuals from a psychological standpoint. So I usually look at individuals and I try to understand what are the physical barriers or the contextual barriers for their practice. I developed this interest particularly in health clubs, not only because I worked there, not only because my past experience was in that context, but because when we think about the places where an adult can practice exercise in our societies, and particularly when we think about a supervised exercise practice, health clubs are probably the context where individuals can receive the most adequate supervision and advising. For someone that is not engaged in some sort of sport activity like basketball, soccer, and so on, it is hard for the common individual to receive professional support when he wants to perform exercise, because anyone can go for a run, anyone can go for bike rides, anyone can go to the beach and swim, and that is perfect as a way to improve physical activity, to improve one's health, to have fun, to improve the well-being of the individual, and that is really nice. But health clubs has this particular characteristic in which we can, as professionals, help individuals to improve their health even more. And if we think that we have probably around 200 million individuals worldwide engaged in activities in health clubs or fitness centers, the potential to improve public health is tremendous. because we are talking about contexts where professionals can interact with their clients and help them to improve their health through exercise. So if this is occurring from a positive perspective or a negative perspective is another topic of discussion. But this context always seemed to me like a very good bet as a way to improve exercise adherence and to improve one's health when looking at the role of an exercise professional.
Yeah, it seems like a really important place to be doing your research from. I mean, speaking just anecdotally, having worked in gyms here in Australia, this is a bit of a generalization, but many don't do a great job of supporting, I think, individual needs for um, motivation and then just in terms of providing an environment that is conducive to someone, particularly who's new to exercise, insecure about their body or their place in a gym with other, really fit people and how they can support those needs. So certainly, I think your work looking into how health clubs and gyms can better support those needs is very, very valuable. And I think it would be so useful, particularly here in Australia for health clubs.
Yeah, I believe so. We must take into consideration that fitness or physical exercise emerges as a branch or as a side effect of sports practice. When we look at recent history, perhaps fitness centers as we know it, they exist probably for 30, 40 years, 50 years in some countries. So it is somehow expected that professionals are still struggling and trying to find the best approaches to improve their practice and to help individuals uh, to attain their goals. I see I see health clubs as an evolving space where many can find activities that they like and they can use to find or to reach their goals. But it does not surprise me that exercise professionals struggles to do this. It does not surprise me that we do not have enough guidelines in some contexts to do our practice, or we don't have that kind of framework that all fitness centers and all professions should follow in order to ensure a proper exercise delivery to, to the individuals. So I think it is a context that sometimes is not adequately accepted as something of interest for public health domains, because we usually see physical activity as something that we want to develop, and that is great, and that is the way we should try to address our communication with the public. But if we have a definition for physical activity and another one for physical exercise, this probably should mean that when someone is working with an exercise professional, the benefits resulting from exercise should be better, at least at some point, at some aspects of physical fitness, than just performing physical activity throughout the day or throughout the week. So I think there is a gap where we need to put some effort in our research in order to help professionals and to improve what individuals can receive from fitness centers. And this gap is one that I am trying to help explore and trying to help to understand in order to help people, in fact, achieving better health.
Yeah, fantastic. It seems like a place with a lot of potential, particularly the way the relationship that exercise professionals often have with individuals, with their clients, to be able to harness and use to improve exercise adherence. And I'm curious, right, with your research, Diogo, either when you set out or now, or both, if it's evolved, was there a particular kind of mission or underlying societal problem that you solved to or that you set out to solve when you started your research, or one that you've just come to kind of try and solve now? Is there something really at the core of what you're trying to solve with your research?
When I look back at the way I've understood exercise when I was beginning this journey and the way I understand it now, it shifted my attention to other aspects. I think when we get out of university and we start working, we see things a little bit like they teach us, and we sometimes are a little bit strict in the way we want people to perform exercise. They should do this amount of exercise. They should do that to reach those guidelines. They should perform exercise X amount of times per week and so on. Nowadays, I look at exercise and physical activity as a way to counteract what is a trend in our society, the increase in sedentary behavior, the increase, for example, in leisure time activities that are very low in energy expenditure. I usually see exercise for some people as a way to reduce stress and to improve anxiety symptoms. And the problem that I am now trying to solve is how can professionals measure and apply some of the ideas that these motivational frameworks bring us in order for them to help people to sustain their practice across time. More than how can we convince people to do that amount of time, to do that intensity, to do those kind of exercises. So the problem that I am trying to address, or one of the problems I'm trying to address, or trying to help professionals address, is how to sustain exercise practice through this motivational lens perspective. And what I have encountered, particularly in my recent years of study and research, is that the hedonic aspects of exercise, so a part of human motivation that we can use to understand and hopefully to help support exercise practice, was lacking instruments and methodological guidelines on how to perform those assessments, those evaluations, on how to interpret those results and what to do with those results. So we have started to create, to translate, and to validate several psychometric instruments. We have tested them on real contexts of exercise practice in several health clubs, for example. And we are trying to translate what derives or what emerges from these motivational theories to something that professionals can use. So we are trying to create some instruments, or we are trying to help them to interpret how we can use this motivational information, these techniques, this knowledge, these evidence-based recommendations into their day-to-day professional practice. So this is what we are focused now, not exclusively, but we dedicate a considerable amount of time to the understanding of this transformation, because I feel that the translational science in this field is a little bit behind what it should be. For example, I can give you just, for example, one or two ideas. We can look at the recent research, for example, in probably any kind of theory, any kind of approach of human motivation. And we are now facing a lot of systematic reviews showing us the strongholds of this theory, or the good aspects of that approach or that technique. And then when we try to explore what has been done experimentally on the field, particularly in this field that I like to study, that is fitness centers and exercise professionals and so on, we face a lack of research and experimental approach and guidelines that we exercise professionals lost. Because we must understand that exercise professionals are trained to be exercise professionals. They are not trained to be psychologists. They do not work with psychologists in the health clubs. I have never seen a psychologist working with a colleague, an exercise professional, in a health club trying to improve exercise activity. This is not a common practice, and I'm not sure if this would ever be such a practice. So as an exercise professional, and that was one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier that really excites me about my research, is that we are somehow lost in the way psychology brings us these ideas, these very interesting ideas, and very evidence-based knowledge on what to do. But then I feel that someone is not translating adequately how can we operationally on the field apply them and help professionals to help their clients. So I think this is a current gap that not only me, but also with my team, we are trying to address it.
Yeah, wow, I love it. That's very centered in translational research, and I'm very curious to hear how you've gone about implementing this and making it accessible. I think for personal trainers, particularly because, like here in Australia, personal trainers to become one, you can get your personal training certificates or qualifications in a matter of 6 months with a couple of online courses. It's a very kind of low barrier to entry, and a lot of your work is obviously very academic in the sense that it's grounded in empirical science. So how you make that accessible for an audience who perhaps doesn't have that level of education, I'm curious as to how you go about that.
Yeah, I can give you some examples. I am not saying that I am having success in this
Right.
translational approach, but
Mm.
at least we are trying to do that. For example, looking back at self-determination theory, which is a very good theory of human behavior, very well studied and with a lot of evidence and a lot of works that have been done to understand how it can be applied in several contexts. We know that if we try to explore how this theory can be applied on the field, um, there are very, very few works that give us operational advices. So they say things like this. So if we satisfy the three basic psychological needs that are universal and innate to all human beings, unique autonomy, competence, and relatedness, we know that people will improve their motivational quality. So we will facilitate the internalization and integration of the behavior, and people will start to do a given activity in a more autonomous way. And we have a lot of evidence supporting this, and this is wonderful because it is also easy to understand and easy to see happening on any context. The issue is that how are professionals going to do this? Because a personal trainer, for example, as you were saying, is concerned about selecting exercise, correcting techniques, are concerned about taking notes about what they are going to do next, and so on. So one approach that we have used, for example, was the use of common exercise variables, for example, like exercise intensity, and using exercise intensity as a way to promote basic psychological needs without having that theoretical concern on just how am I going to promote autonomy or how am I going to promote competence or relatedness. I should promote choice. I should promote competence giving feedback, or I should show concern and empathy with my client. Yes, we know this is important. This can be achieved, for example, using conversation. We can talk and show our client that we are concerned about how they are feeling or they are experiencing exercise. We can give them some choice. For example, we need to do a 10-minute warm up. And you can choose to do it on the treadmill, on the bike, or you can choose to do it on the rowing machine, and so on. So this is kind of a way of improving or trying to support autonomy. We can give specific feedback, or we can adjust exercise, making them easier or a little bit harder in order to facilitate the perception of exercise of improved competence. And these are techniques and these are approaches that we can do to support basic psychological needs. And so hopefully we do more autonomous ways of regulating motivation. But what we are exploring is that perhaps we can use, for example, as I was saying, intensity in a way to support these basic psychological needs without the need to be thinking about motivational tools. For example, we tested if, in some recent papers, if preference agreements, intensity preference agreements, was conductive of the development of basic psychological needs. So we went, in the first approach, we studied this through a cross-sectional study, or it was, in fact, two cross-sectional studies, where people who reported that their intensity preference, which is these trait-like characteristics that is different in all individuals. Um, this trait Y characteristic, this intensity preference, was aligned with the intensity they were currently doing in their exercise routine. People tend to work out more often. They tend to have higher habit scores, higher intention to continue exercise scores. And we look at this and started to see that perhaps this is a factor that can add to our struggle to improve adherence. And we saw the opposite, and this was particularly negative, that when individuals present no kinds of preference agreement or even tolerance agreement, so intensity preference or intensity tolerance agreement, they were in fact more prone to drop out from their exercise routines. So these cross-sectional studies show us an idea where perhaps we can manipulate exercise intensity. It is a verb that for us exercise professionals, it is very common. We need to use it with all clients in all activities, and perhaps we can use it in a way to support the development of basic psychological needs. So we have developed some studies. We have some experimental studies. We have a randomized control trial that was performed. It's under development, and some of the studies are now in revision or ready to be presented in conference, and we are finishing our main paper of that study. And we have seen that, in fact, this is not the only factor, but when preference and tolerance are in agreement with the current exercise intensity, people, in fact, seem to want to work out more. So the result of our experimental study shows that perhaps if we use intensity aligned with what people want to do, this would lead to better adherence and other outcomes. So this raises several questions, as probably someone that has read my research are now facing. For example, why is intensity so important for this assumption? And this is one aspect. And how is this preference and tolerance constructs useful for exercise professionals? The ramifications that can emerge from this specific approach to exercise are very relevant. And what we feel that we can do in the next years is this continuous approach to translate these tools, these approaches, in order to simplify or in order to help professionals to do their work without having this huge consideration regarding psychological constructs, motivational theories, but at the same time improving one's motivation and approach to exercise.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic example of application from a exercise and fitness professional point of view. So, as I understand it, there, it's not that one intensity is better for predicting someone's adherence to exercise or future adherence. It's that agreement, like you said. It's that whatever your preference of intensity is in the tolerance, which is your ability to tolerate or put up with uncomfortable intensities. Uh, the individual differences that we all have based on preference for higher intensity and tolerance for higher intensities. If you're training at an actual intensity that is aligned with that, whether it's higher or lower, that is the key that someone for themselves or an exercise professional listening should really be attuned to, is matching that with your clients or your own preference and tolerance.
As far as our research is telling us, that seems to be a key aspect. Of course, that these words need replication. We need to continue to understand this with different samples and with different contexts. But I think you put the idea very, very clearly. So preference and tolerance are relevant, and this agreement is relevant because it will reflect a tailored approach to exercise prescription, particularly regarding intensity. But it is important to clarify that these are not the only aspects that are relevant for exercise participation or exercise adherence. So these are just two constructs that we are using to understand the relation that individual has with exercise intensity. So, for example, in some of our research, we are heavily grounded on the work of Paddy Akekakis and Steve Petrozel and Eric Hall. They are, and you already had Steve Petrozel on your show previously, and they are strongly grounded on the idea that an improved effective response will lead to improved motivation and will help support exercise practice. So when we study this level of agreement between preference and tolerance, what we are indirectly studying is that when intensity is aligned with what someone wants to do, perhaps what he is experiencing from exercise is an improved effective response. So this is very interesting because grounded on hedonic assumptions, when someone feels that an activity is pleasurable, they tend to approach that activity. And when someone experiences or feels that something is not pleasant, they tend not to repeat it or even to avoid it. So instead of just being focused on the study on how to improve directly the effective response, because this would be hard for some professionals to do in some contexts, we try to look at this indirectly. So, what are the conditions that we can create to obtain an improved effective response? And this perhaps could lead us to a little bit more factors or a little bit more weight on the scale that is improving the motivation for exercise. So, this is putting a little bit more weight towards a behavior that we believe people should do more often.
Yeah. Okay. So one question that I have then reading through the whole concept of agreement with your exercise intensity preference and your exercise intensity tolerance and the actual intensity. If that is good, the better the agreement you have there, the better the outcome as far as adherence goes, and you continuing to exercise goes. What if for your own actual physical health goal, let's just say, I'm trying to improve my sprint speed for soccer, or if, an exercise professional is, trying to get their client to do HIIT because, high intensity interval training because it's the best for, their goal, whatever that is. Well, what advice is there, or what does the evidence say when your goal doesn't necessarily match up with your preference or tolerance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think understood where you are trying to get, and I'm not sure if I have an answer to that,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I will share my ideas
Mm,
on that question.
yeah,
So sometimes I receive those questions regarding how can preference and tolerance be used on athletes, for example, or how can this be interpreted in those contexts. Well, uh, I am not really sure that athletes can have the luxury to have exercise aligned with their preference and tolerance.
right.
I'm not really sure what are the difference in some points of an individual life
Mm,
that leads him to perform a given sport activity. For example, I was an athlete in the past. I performed high jump and some long jump and some sprinting activities, track and field. And I recall that although the activities were at sometimes the trainings were at sometimes really heavy and really hard to perform, nonetheless, I enjoyed doing them. I enjoyed the relation I had with my colleagues, my the other athletes, with my coach. I really enjoyed meeting colleagues when we were on a competition, colleagues that were from other parts of the country, and we only meet on those occasions. So there are several factors that can help us understand why someone performs a given activity. I think, or I believe, that preference and tolerance lose some of their usefulness when we are talking about athletes because there are several other factors that combined leads to the intention or lead to the will to perform that activity. But when I look at preference and tolerance, for example, I don't know if this was the initial idea that the authors Paddy Akikakis and Eric Hall, and so on, and other colleagues that were involved later on the development of this instrument. I don't know if their initial intention was to use this on athletes. I think it can be used to understand their relation with some activities they are performing. But I see it as a way just to help professionals to understand the relation of someone that does not practice exercise regularly or has a very low physical fitness. And I think this is useful, particularly for those populations, for those individuals who are not, do not do exercise regularly or has a very high sedentary behavior. And so they need to begin their exercise in a very pleasurable way in order to create an approach to their practice and not the different condition where they will be set apart or they will feel that this is not for me because this is really hard. I need to suffer to do this, or I feel a lot of pain today or in the following days as a result of my activity. So if we can, with this and other instruments and with other approach, understand how we can expose exercise to a given individual who is not an athlete, who is not prone to receive exercise as something that is hard to do, that feels unpleasant, I think we are already gaining a little bit on the topic. And if you consider, you talked about HIIT. High intensity activities is a very useful approach for many individuals. What we must consider is that if we try to expose someone who has a very low physical fitness to a high intensity activity, probably he will not feel that activity as being something pleasant. Or probably he will feel that the competence, the perceived competence in that activity perhaps is not the best. So we can look at high exercise intensity as a tool, an important tool for some individuals. But I think what should decide if the individual can or cannot do that kind of activity is related with what he wants to do. If the individual wants to experience a high intensity activity, perhaps adjusted to their physical fitness, we can expose the individual to that activity. And perhaps if the individual wants to experience high intensity activities, but he does not really know what is a high intensity activity, and then we must explore with caution what that activity can be or how it can be experienced by that individual. And on the third point, sometimes we need to understand that when an individual says that he wants to do a high intensity training activity, we must consider that perhaps running on a treadmill at a very slow pace for many individuals is high intensity. And it's something that we as exercise professionals often tend to put aside. Because, for example, for someone who is used to train, for someone who has done undergraduate course on physical education or sport and so on, we are used to run, to jump, to perform physical activities. Perhaps we were athletes and we are transitioning to be professionals, or we really like sport and we have performed any kind of activity for many years of our lives. But this individual that is very low on his physical fitness, which has a very high amount of time on sedentary behavior, and nonetheless wants to try an activity that is or has a high intensity, perhaps running for him at a very low pace is high intensity. And for us or for an individual which is highly trained, running at a very low pace is not enough to perform a warm-up. We need to consider that what is key here is individuality. What the individual wants to do, likes to do, and what he is experiencing during the activity. And that should be how we guide our intervention and not trying to impose the activities to the individual, or to impose a given activity or a given intensity just because it might be good or because it might be short term, then so the individual can perform a workout in 20 minutes instead of 1 hour, and so on.
Hello everyone, a quick break from today's episode. At the Mental Wellbeing College, we are committed to the goal of communicating evidence-based wellbeing strategies out to the broader community. The goal of this podcast is to bridge a gap between self-help material and peer-reviewed research by providing evidence-based discussion that respects the nuances of psychology but is digestible for all audiences. Ultimately, I hope that you as a listener feel empowered after each episode so that you can take away and implement strategies to improve your own mental well-being. If you have gained value from this episode of the Mental Wellbeing College, I would be so grateful if you were to hit subscribe or follow, or to share this episode with someone that you love. This is how we continue to grow the show, get the message out, and to impact people in need by providing such information and strategies. Thanks so much for tuning in. It means a lot to us here at the Mental Wellbeing College. And now back to today's episode. Yeah, that's such an important point, particularly in terms of what I see a lot in pop culture or on social media, kind of fitness influencers. There's a lot of this no pain, no gain push, right, where high intensity exercise is what everyone should be doing, whereas really a lot of your research, as I understand it, Yoga, really advocates for, like you said, individual differences and letting the individual difference in exercise intensity, preference, and tolerance guide the actual intensity. And so if we kind of move to, I suppose, the evidence for affect and what it predicts, it seems like there's a lot of good systematic review evidence showing that, for example, one by Rose and Kate in 2015, which I'll link in the show notes, showing that affect during exercise tends to predict someone's adherence to exercise in the future. Less so for affect that someone might report when exercise is done, but particularly during exercise, that this is a really important outcome that people should be considering.
Yeah, and our research is heavily focused on that aspect. So that systematic review showed us that, and it was a first clear indication that perhaps what people are feeling during exercise is relevant for continuous adherence. And we are really focused on trying to measure and understanding what is happening during exercise. So in the beginning of this millennium, some researchers show us that measuring what people are feeling before and after exercise is not enough to understand how their experience during the exercise was. So usually people tend to feel better after exercise. There are a lot of aspects that can help us understand that. Steve Petrozello explained some of those in the previous podcast. But we can look at this through more to a simple approach, like if someone puts me to do 20 burpees, for example,
Yeah.
the moment that for me, example,
Yeah.
because there are individuals who like to do burpees, but for me, for example,
Yeah.
the best time of doing burpees is when they are over. I
Yeah.
don't like doing burpees. For me,
Yeah.
when they are over, it is perfect. I feel really good.
I'm with
It's
you there.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not the only one. So this is important because sometimes throughout, for example, 45 minutes or 60 minutes workout, people tend to vary how they feel during exercise. We are expected to have low, pleasant activities during warm-up, during the main stage of the workout. Perhaps people may experience high activation, pleasant feelings, or high activation, unpleasant feelings. So this is important because if how we feel during exercise translates into an improved exercise adherence, then we need to understand what is happening during exercise. And for that, we need to measure, or at least have some instruments to understand how each individual is experiencing exercise. So we can look, for example, for the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines, and they recommend understanding this affective response during exercise, and they present it as a predictor of future exercise participation. but they do not tell us how we can do it. For example, they say that affect regulation is really important for us to understand how our clients are experiencing exercise. We need to improve positive affective responses, but they do not tell us how we should do it. They told us in 2011 in the position stand that we could use, for example, scales like the feeling scale, where the participant tell us how he is experiencing activity, if he experiences a pleasant activity or an unpleasant activity. But that isn't sufficient because they do not tell us how often should we measure, at what time points should we measure it, and how are we going to interpret those indications. For example, during 60 minutes of a common workout in the workout room, for example, 10 minutes of aerobic activity, 30 minutes of resistance training, then an additional 20 minutes of aerobic activity, and ending the session with stretching activities. When should we measure the effective response? And should we measure it during exercise, during the resting pauses, immediately after exercise, 10 minutes after exercise? So without these considerations, saying that positive affective response during exercise is important to adherence is interesting, but if we do not know how to measure, how to interpret, then we are still unable to help professionals to improve exercise adherence. And we want professionals to help individuals to improve their health. So we have developed several works, and we now have preliminary indications on how to apply two instruments. So we are using the feeling scale and the felt arousal scale as two instruments that can give us an indication of how someone is experiencing exercise at a given point. We have this indication for example, for resistance training, where we can apply these scales immediately after the exercise termination. For example, someone is doing a squat, and as soon as the individual stops the exercise, we can ask him how is he experiencing the exercise with the feeling scale and the level of activation of the exercise. We tested if it was better to measure during exercise, during the reps, or afterwards, but measuring during brings us some concerns, safety concerns, some difficulty of assessing something during the exercise. And we have tested it and have understood that the difference is so small of the results we are obtaining during versus immediately after that perhaps we can ask immediately after. But for example, this is a good indication for someone who wants to assess or interpret the feeling scale, the felt arousal scale, or interpret the effective response in resistance training. But we also tested this in stretching exercise, and we used static stretching exercise, and we noticed that measuring during or immediately after is considerably different in, for example, vigorous intensity activities. And I think everybody who has ever stretched a muscle during the class or something like that can easily understand that if I am stretching my hamstrings, for example, with a very high intensity, it can become very, very unpleasant. And of course, as soon as I stop my stretching, I will immediately feel better. So if we want to understand what is the true effective response during exercise, I need to measure during the stretch. Why? Because measuring during the resting periods would show us an effective response that would be better than the one that he is currently experiencing. And that's why we are so interested in promoting a positive effective response in exercise. Because if stretching could be done, for example, in a more pleasant way with, for example, a low intensity, and perhaps what the individual is experiencing during the activity would be a facilitator of exercise adherence, of the creation of the habit development for exercise practice. So this is interesting because if we measure on those moments that are easy for us as exercise professionals, we are probably not capturing the true essence of the effective response. For example, I will give you the best example for those that are listening and are interested on understanding how to measure these issues. For example, in aerobic activities, we have now a study under review where we tested the same thing that we have already done for resistance training and stretching activities. And we aim to understand if in wide intensity, moderate intensity, and vigorous intensity, if measuring during exercise or immediately after exercise would lead to the same outcomes. And what we have seen is similar to what we have seen in stretching activities. So we should measure the effective response during aerobic activities for moderate and vigorous intensities, because as soon as the activity stops, the individual immediately feels better. We call this the effective rebound, so an improvement in the effective response due to the termination of the exercise. And we can be misled by these results, considering that, okay, the individual replied as he is feeling good, yeah, but he's feeling good after the part of the pain has ended.
Done. Yeah.
So this is not the correct interpretation that we want. We want to understand what are the worst moments. This is a simplification of my idea, but what are the worst moments? Those are the ones we want to catch, because if the worst moments are rearranged by exercise professionals, trying to being not that bad, but trying to be a little bit more pleasant, perhaps the other moments will also risen and become a little bit more pleasant, and perhaps we can acquire an exercise session where the individual has mainly experienced positive effective response, and we have avoided those negative ones that we feel that may condition future exercise participation. So, for example, we have a lot here to unpack if you want to explore the idea on, yeah, it is important how we are feeling during exercise. To measure is another aspect. How we can align the individual preference and what we prescribe is another aspect. So we have the need to start, in my opinion, to start looking at exercise prescription as something that should be guided towards not only the goal of the individual, but how he will experience his subjective experience of the exercise prescription.
Yeah. Look, there is a lot to unpack there for sure. So you mentioned these two scales, and I think most people listening won't have heard of them. The felt arousal scale and the feeling scale, which are very easy to do. They're literally like marking a unit from -5 to +5 in terms of how you feel, or 0 to 5 in terms of the level of activation for the felt arousal scale. So very quick, easy measurements to do. But I'm just trying to think practically and put my fitness professional hat on. So you kind of alluded to this earlier, Diogo. If I'm doing something really high intensity, like a squat, like you mentioned, or a sprint, given the affective rebound and how I feel after is going to be markedly different to how I feel during that high intensity exercise, how should one go about measuring using those two scales? Do you ask someone mid squat, what are you on the scale, or yeah?
That is something that we are currently fighting to understand.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, in resistance training, we are relatively sure that we can measure as soon as the exercise terminates. For example, you have to do 5 resistance exercises, 2 sets of 15 reps, for example, something like that. You can do, for example, the 2 sets of 15 reps of the first exercise, and as soon as you stop the exercise, you can apply the feeling scale. As you say, it ranges from -5 to +5, and the felt arousal scale, which ranges from 1 to 6. And we can choose, for example, to apply after each exercise, or just after the first exercise, after the third, and after the fifth, according with the session went and the degree of understanding that we would like to receive from that session. But for example, if you are climbing a rope or if you are doing a sprint, like you were saying, we have no chance of measuring during the activity because we are not going to stop someone in the middle
Bit
of the
dangerous.
road. How are you feeling? Well, it's not the way we ask it, but
Yeah.
yeah, you understand the idea. So
Yeah.
I think at this time, we, at least our research group, does not have um, any better suggestions for some activities. Some of them will be a little bit outside the capability of these two scales to capture what they are experiencing. So that's why, for example, we tested this on static stretching exercise and not dynamic stretching exercise, exactly because of that. How are we going to measure something during exercise when the individual is moving around the exercise room or moving around the track and field and so on, the track of exercise and so on. So, what we can start to look in the future is to other ways to measure core effect, this very basic, primitive neurophysiological information that is available to our conscience. I think that we are not ready to take that jump because for according to what I have read from other research groups, I am not seeing any kind of method or instrument that is going to solve this issue anytime soon. I may be wrong, but at this time, I'm not seeing anything that can solve this issue. But honestly, I don't think that is a problem because we can measure how someone is feeling during exercise in some moments. We can probably leave a sprint, for example, or some kind of activity out of this assessment because it is not practical to do it. But we have other measures of this affective relation with exercise that can be used after exercise. Although it's not, in some cases, as interesting as measuring during, but we also have some indications that, for example, the affective recall of exercise, the anticipated affective response to a session or to an exercise or to an activity, also the enjoyment experience in a given activity, these are affective based or affective related constructs and ideas that can help us understand the individual relation with the activity or with the training session. And so if we look at all these variables collectively for a given individual, we can receive an affective panorama that is interesting to understand what the person is experiencing. So we are not totally blind in some aspects. We just need to look to other facets of the affective response.
Given, yeah, that affect is such an important metric in terms of having people adhere to exercise, and this kind of adherence problem is still such a huge problem despite all this proliferation of evidence that's come out about why exercise is good for us physically and mentally over the past, several decades. My observation is that much of the public health campaigns around getting people to move more, because this is a population or indeed a global issue, but much of the public health campaigns pertain to this is why you should move more of that rational, informational approach, if you like, where it's providing facts and information rather than looking at variables like the ones that we've discussed today and that you research heavily into, how to make it more affectively pleasing so someone continues to exercise. So given there's this kind of gap in a public health approach, how can we change that such that the people, the organizations, the national bodies that matter, whether it's the American College of Sports Medicine or Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, actually implement and recognize the importance of affect in getting people to move more?
That's a very interesting question, and very important for all of those who are interested in promoting public health. As you were saying, we notice a trend where public entities and even private entities related to the promotion of exercise practice or physical activity in general, they tend to suggest that you should engage in physical activity because it is good for your health or because it will help you reduce the risk of the disease A or the disease B and so on. I think this is a good approach to some extent, but I feel it is lacking the consideration of other aspects of the human behavior and human understanding of motivation. So I believe that currently, in most countries, the majority of the population knows that exercise is good for their health. It's difficult to find someone which does not understand that, okay, being physically active, practicing this activity, or being enrolled in a health club is good for my health. It's good not only for losing weight, it's good not only for gaining, for example, muscle mass, but it's important for my health in general. So trying to continue to incentivize people to do something because it is good may work to some extent, but data from the last 20, 30 years is showing us that perhaps this is not the best way, or it's not the only way to do that. So grounded on dual process theories that has been popularized by several authors and several researchers like Daniel Kahneman and so on, and many others, they present us this idea that human thinking, human decision-making machine is grounded on these two systems, system one and system two, where one is more quick and intuitive, and the other one is a little bit more slow, more reflective, more grounded on our experience, on an in-depth analysis of the information that we have received and the information that we have stored in our memory. And the results of the interaction of these two systems would lead us to do or to not do a given behavior. So if we consider, for example, this hedonic-based approach on, for example, system one, we can see that public message towards exercise do not reflect that an activity is fun, do not reflect an activity can be experienced as a pleasant sensation or a pleasant experience. For example, when we see recommendations for use the stairs more often instead of the escalator, or try to walk more in your neighborhoods instead of using your car. These are good messages, generally speaking, these are good messages, but they are short in conveying the idea and the message that perhaps we can do some kind of movement that is interesting for our health just because it is fun, just because it is pleasant for us, because you feel that it develops a sense of enjoyment or fulfillment in your life, in your day-to-day activities. And I think that we should try and aim to help people understand that physical activity should be a lifelong concern, a lifelong decision, and that for us to understand and to choose something or an activity that we'd like to perform for a long time, this activity should be chosen individually instead of individual and towards something that the individual wants to do and likes to do, more than you should do it because it is important for your health or because you can have this health consequence as a result of those activities. For example, self-determination theory says that when someone performs exercise just because someone told him he should, because it is important for his health, self-determination theory calls this a controlled form of motivation. So the individual is performing the activity because someone outside of his thinking, of his feeling, of his interpretation is telling him he should do. We know that controlled forms of motivation tend to not impact the behavior long term. So the individual may be very, very strongly motivated to perform exercise because he wants to lose weight to the summer season and consequently have a better appearance to go with his friends to the beach. But this motivation, the energy behind this motivation is sustained by something that comes outside of the individual. I want to improve my image so that the others perceive me as more interesting, or I will lose weight because someone says to me that you should really lose weight. It is really, really important for your health. So these external and introjected forms of motivational regulation are not usually the best to sustain exercise or a behavior across time. And the message that sometimes we are giving the individuals to promote the exercise are related to these health conditions. So practice to be healthier, practice to lose weight, practice if you don't want to have some sort of cardiovascular disease. So if we know that this kind of motivation are not the best to sustain practice, why are we just focusing on those? For example, self-determination theory also says to us that the autonomous regulations are more interesting to support exercise or a given behavior. So the extreme of the self-determination theory of this autonomous regulation is intrinsic motivation, which means that someone performs an activity because he likes or enjoys the activity for pure interests in the development of that activity. So this approaches the idea of I do something because I like it, I enjoy doing it. And we know that when someone performs that activity because of these reasons, they tend to perform it for a longer period of time and with more commitment. So if you noticed, the extreme of the self-determination theory has this touch to hedonic components of motivation. So why can't we as professionals, for example, as educators regarding the physical exercise and physical activity literacy, why can't we help people to understand that movement is something important for our health, is something that is natural for human beings, and each individual must find the activities that they want to perform on a regular basis, they enjoy performing, and they feel that they can do those activities across or throughout all their life or a very long period of time. And we, particularly in fitness centers, we sometimes forget that our role as professionals are to help people to promote their health through physical exercise. Our role is not to promote physical exercise in the fitness center only, because the individual comes to train with us 3 times a week, but the rest of his life is outside the health club. So what advice are we giving to people to help them sustain their practice? Are we advising them to pursue activities that we do not have in our space? Because this would be bad for our business. Né? For example, someone wants to dance. Dance is a great activity to increase physical activity levels. If someone wants to dance and if that person feels that dancing is a way to keep being physically active throughout life, and we do not have dance classes in our health club, what are we going to do? Are we going to advise the individual to continue our health club, or are we going to advise them to pursue that activity in order to improve their health, but probably leaving the health club? So I think public message needs to be a little bit reframed in order to consider additional aspects, not only grounded on the rational thinking processes, because humans are not only thinking machines. We do not do things merely because someone tell us that it is important, it is relevant. We are not as rational the majority of the moments as we think we are. And in the other side, we should try to promote the idea that if you like walking, walk a little bit more. You go walk with your dog, just walk a little bit more with your dog. If you like biking, take your bike and go a little bit to the coast or someplace and bike. We need to reframe the idea that physical exercise needs to be hard, needs to be painful, needs to be unpleasant, and we should do it because it is important for our health, and we should do it because exercise is medicine. Yes, but also no. Yes, that's all true, that's all important, but exercise is always, it's also a way of someone having fun, to spend some time in their leisure activities, some that it can be performed with family, fathers or mothers playing with their children in the backyard or in the park and so on. So we need, as professionals and all professionals that are interested in the promotion of public health, to sell the idea, to pass the idea that exercise should be something that you enjoy doing and you would like to perform often, and not the idea that do it because okay it is good for your health, or you should do it because you want to avoid that kind of illness, or you need to suffer to obtain results. This is the worst idea that we can sell, the no pain no gain idea, that you must suffer a lot if you want to receive a lot of benefits. No, athletes needs to suffer a lot in order to improve their performance. We, common folks, common individuals, we are not athletes. We are not capable of enduring what athletes want to endure or are capable of enduring. Our goals are not that demanding as athletes have. So perhaps we need to be exposed to a different set, a different. Um, we should be exposed to a different set of characteristics in order to make the activity fruitful, because we would like to improve one's health, but at the same time, something that the individual feels that he likes and wants to enjoy. Imposing activities often is not the best approach to supporting exercise, or to promote a public message.
Yeah, no, I love it, Diogo. It's music to my ears. What you're saying, and I'm certainly in complete agreement with yourself. See the exercises medicine initiative, pushed everywhere, and obviously it certainly is, given the absolute myriad of benefits both physically and mentally. But it seems not to be an inherently wrong approach, just an incomplete approach, particularly from a health and fitness professional who might be dealing with someone who's sedentary. um, Typically they're there having that conversation because they know there's some benefits to exercise and they want help making it happen, rather than just what are the benefits for me. So I see the affect and the hedonic approach as a way that health professionals can get their clients to the goal of doing something that they enjoy, because I don't think that's revolutionary, right? To the idea of doing something or finding a different way to get to the same goal of doing more exercise, or different ways to skin a cat. But what I do think is really, really useful is like the feeling scale and the felt arousal scale. And even if you don't have access to those scales, is just introspecting on how you're feeling when you're doing different things as a guide to the affect that you're feeling during different exercise, and then iterating based on that. Okay, I feel great when I go for a run at this particular intensity in this particular environment, maybe outside versus on a treadmill inside. So just that level of reflection and introspection on the affective response, I think, in itself, independent of any scales, if you're not that inclined, can be really useful for people.
Yeah, for them, you touch some really interesting aspects, because we can use these ideas that we are now discussing with different depths. For example, a public message for someone who wants to individually starts increasing their physical activity levels. We can pass the idea of choose an activity that you would like to perform, and then while you are performing it, try to experience some positive sensations from it. If you start to feel that the activity is becoming too hard, too painful, too uncomfortable, slow down a little bit. And then, when you feel that the activity, after you slow down, if you feel the activity is again being a little bit too pleasant too easy to perform, try to increase a little bit the intensity. I use the idea of running to my students to pass this notion. For example, I usually go out for running, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, and I ask my students, after they learn the percentage of heart rate maximum they should use, or the percentage of VO2 max they should use in order to improve this or that specific component of physical fitness, of aerobic physical fitness. And then I ask them, well, and if I would just like to perform these 20 minutes of running where I run 5 minutes, then I walk 2 minutes, and then I run another 4 minutes, and then I choose after those 4 minutes to do 1 minute of very fast running, and then I choose again. Why can't I just choose the intensity or the pace of my running activity, not based on a percentage of intensity defined by the guidelines, but alternatively, why can't I choose those activities based on what I am experiencing? Because we have a considerable amount of evidence suggesting that when an individual self-selects exercise intensity, they tend to choose an intensity that brings positive outcomes to their health. So we do not need to be framed in that specific interval where we know that if you reach that point of your heart rate, you will acquire the most benefits of this activity. Yeah, we know this, but perhaps being a little bit below that score will also give us health benefits and cumulatively improve one's interest of performing that activity again. Because sometimes I do not want to run 20 minutes continuously because I am tired or something hurts or so on. I don't know. I don't recall any other reasons. But sometimes I just feel that I am running with a very strong pace, with a very quick pace. Let me slow down. I am not fighting to improve my time record, or I'm not fighting to improve my distance. I am just fighting to find the best conditions for me to experience an activity that I like and to receive those outcomes. So this is the first level of communication that we can pass to an individual that which is performing exercise without supervision. We can advise them to self-select the exercise conditions in order to them to feel they are pleasant and to regulate those characteristics. They do not need to go to the park and run and feel it is really, really hard. Second level, we can go, for example, to exercise professionals, where those indications that you were presenting by measuring the effective response, plotting them on the circumplex model to have this map reading of the effective panorama of an exerciser. In that level of depth, we can use several instruments, we can measure in, we can interpret those informations and use them to refine the exercise we are prescribing and to help individuals to experience an activity which is pleasant but is also conducive of obtaining their goals and can be an improvement to their motivation across time. These levels of message are important for individuals to regulate their practice, but in my view, and this is merely an idea that I have, which we are trying to explore, but at this time we do not have sufficient data for me to say, okay, we have published this, we have convincing evidence. So at this point, we do not have that kind of support. But we have at least this idea where promoting exercise, which is experienced across time in a very unpleasant way, tends to not only make people leave the activity, but they tend to create this antipathy towards exercise or towards physical activity. And this can be one of the reasons why we have so many people unwilling to start an exercise program. And this may be a problem of exercise professionals. We were throughout the years so concerned of giving them the right dose of exercise in order to receive the correct amount of positive adaptation, meaning giving them the best exercise routine for their goals, that perhaps we were creating without knowing this negative association to physical activities. And I am concerned, and I see this in the context where I work, that people often say that they left a fitness center not only because they do not experience the activity, but mainly because they feel that no, this is not for me. This is really hard. I don't like this context. So they create a kind of aversion, the kind of antipathy towards that activity. I don't like that. No way I'm going back to a gym. No way I'm going back to do exercise in this kind of conditions. So one issue is to be unable to keep people going to practice the exercise. The other issue is we do not want to create this negative memory when they recall what is exercise. So this is a problem that we as professionals must consider. So messages can be very clear and grounded on several levels of that. Public message: experience something positive that you would like and regulate the activity in order that you feel that you can do it, you feel competent doing, and there is no problem if you choose to go a little bit faster, a little bit slower, and so on. A second message: we can work with people and try to understand what they are doing through instruments, through the evaluation of several affective characteristics and motivational characteristics, and adjust our training. And of course, we could, and we are trying to do that in the third and more in-depth degree of caution, to emit recommendations to researchers for them to accurately measure the effective response in order for us to improve the data that we have regarding these variables on exercise, for us to advance this topic of research, because we feel that the effective response has been measured without the adequate caution. Sometimes we have a lot of data of wrong time points, or at least time points that are not adequate for the effective response assessment. And we are constructing ideas, we are reaching conclusions that are biased because we did not have until recently methodological guidelines on how to apply these scales on exercise context and specifically for the adherence to exercise study. So I believe we are just starting on, at least not starting the study of these variables, because this has started 20 years ago. But at least I feel that we are starting to reach researchers who are interested on the topic and colleagues which are on the field with these ideas that, okay, we can do a little bit better and we can change the way we sell, or we can change the way we are expressing the role of the pleasantness and enjoyment that physical activity should give to everybody.
Yeah, well, I love that summary, Diogo. I think it's a perfect summary of encapsulates most of the important points that we've actually covered today. And yeah, I'm excited to watch this landscape evolve. It's, I've only personally just come across the hedonic elements, the affective elements of exercise and how they relate to adherence, recently after the wonderful Steve Petrozello introduced me to it. But it seems like a really rapidly evolving landscape, and certainly, thank you for your work, because it really has opened my eyes to a new way of looking at exercise. I was previously really come from a more cognitivist approach to looking at how to improve adherence. So this has really changed my own, philosophy, and opened my eyes to new ways of improving exercise adherence. So thank you for the impact you've had on me, and the impact I anticipate you'll have on many listeners and students alike who will be now introduced to this great literature of work.
I'm very excited to the idea that other colleagues start to look at these variables and this approach to exercise with a different lens. And the ideas that we are studying and are proposing are not necessarily new. We are just trying to translate them to exercise professionals and to all colleagues that are interested in promoting exercise and promoting adherence. Hopefully, we will be able to in the future keep developing some of these ideas, some of these instruments, and hopefully we can help improve the population health. We can fight this increase in sedentary behavior, the low physical activity that we are now facing in most countries, and which are bringing us considerable concerns regarding their health. So we are very excited to be helping a little bit in this topic of motivation and exercise practice.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Mental Wellbeing College. If you've made it this far, it means you've gleaned a ton of value from today's episode, or you've fallen asleep. I sincerely hope that it's the former, and if it is, I would be so grateful if you were to hit subscribe, follow, or to share this podcast with someone you care about. Our mission here at the Mental Wellbeing College is to provide a free and accessible resource for people to take action and implement to improve their own mental wellbeing. And you subscribing, following, and or sharing helps us to achieve that mission and to impact people in need. Thanks so much for tuning in. It means a lot. We'll see you next week on the Mental Wellbeing College.